evening, everyone. How you doing? Chris had a major appointment tonight that he forgot about, so he's not gonna. He's only going to be 2 minutes late. My name is Carl Modica, and I'm from Buffalo.
Am I supposed to start that 45-second timer now?
Okay, yeah, you can start it now. I'll have the case of beer ready for you. I'm from the Buffalo Civil War Roundtable, and the reason I appreciate Chris allowing me a few seconds and of his time in the beginning here, as well as Ryan, because a lot of people don't know Buffalo Civil War Roundtable, and I'm just here to say yes, we are there. We currently have meetings at the Buffalo History Museum, the only real physical building left from the Pan Am Exposition. And our meetings are at 6 o'clock. You can look us up online, Buffalo Civil War Roundtable, or if you're seriously interested, I do have a few apps here if you want to further possibly be involved and attend our meetings. We only have 5 meetings a year, but we are responsible for the Buffalo Lincoln Day celebration in February every year, the longest running Lincoln birthday party in the country, including Springfield, Illinois, Hodgsonville, you name it. Buffalo's got it since 1872. I'm not talking about 1950 or something, but 1872. And I didn't start it. No, we still have it. Okay, thank you very much, everyone. Buffalo Civil War Roundtable, and go Yankees. After all this tomorrow.
Well, good evening, everyone. I want to welcome you all to the Holland Land Office Museum for our guest speaker series. This is something we started about 8 years ago now, and we have about 2 speakers a month at various times on various local topics. So it's very nice to see all of you here tonight, some new and some old faces. So we're very happy to have Chris Mackowski back for the 3rd time. It's always a little extra effort to get Chris here, but we always persevere. This year we had to postpone it twice, or change the date twice, but we made it. So we're very happy to have him back here in Western New York for a little bit. So tonight he's going to talk about the last days of Stonewall Jackson.
Ryan really deserves sainthood because the patience that man requires to nail me down. Because like I am the typical absent-minded professor, and I'm like, oh yeah, I'd love to come, and then like I'll forget, and then he'll be like, Chris, just wanted to check on that. Like, oh yes, absolutely. And so I want to
something I learned at Bonaventure.
Yeah. So I want to thank Ryan for his patience and the invitation to come here. Great museum. I really appreciate you guys coming out to support the museum and the programming that it offers. We do have copies of several of our books up here from the Emerging Civil War series. Proceeds from the sale of these books goes to help support this museum. So if you come up here, normally I'm like, I need help supporting my granddaughters. Please buy my books, right? And all of that money goes to spoiling my grandchildren. But tonight, proceeds will go to help support this museum. Now, I was supposed to originally come here on the 21st of January, which would have been Stonewall Jackson's birthday. And I was going to bring birthday Timbits for everybody. And then we got snowed out, right? So I go to Tim Hortons tonight, and I'm like, give me all of your birthday Timbits. And they're like, we have 11. All right, well, give me your 11. They come in packages of 20 or 40. Well, you don't have 40, you don't have 20. So I have 11 birthday Timbits, and then I have 9 blueberry Timbits. So if you want to celebrate Stonewall Jackson's birthday with some Timbits. A little known fact, he loved lemons and he loved Timbits. So you can come up.
Very little known.
Very little known fact. I'm with a group of historians. We collectively call ourselves Emerging Civil War. There are 30 of us. We come from public history backgrounds. We're on the front lines at battlefields, at museums, really connecting with the public about America's defining event and how the Civil War has made us who we are. One of my colleagues, Kevin Pollock, his dad, Jerome's in the audience with us tonight, one of our great emerging voices in the field. You can follow along with us on our blog at emergingcivilwar.com. Free content every day from lots of different historians with different writing styles, backgrounds, interests, and it's all free. We also have a book series. A number of our titles are up here tonight. We've got an annual symposium. Raise your hands if you've been to the symposium before. It's always the first weekend of August. It's on the Spotsylvania Courthouse battlefield down in Virginia. This year our theme is the cities of war. Our keynote speaker will be Ted Savage, talking about the Augusta Power Works. We've got 10 historians all together who will be coming and sharing stories. Historian John Hennessy will be doing a tour of downtown Fredericksburg as part of that. Love to have you guys join us. You can find information on our website. And I think the last bit of business I have is among the books that's not part of the series, but since I've been here last, I have a hardcover book about the Battle of Spotsylvania Courthouse that's available. And of course, Emory Upton, the hometown boy, plays a really important role in that battle on the 10th of May, 1864. So if you're interested, that's one of the book selections that they have here. Oh, and I will mention, we also have a podcast at Emerging Civil War that you can get from wherever you get your favorite podcasts. We do that every week, and I basically just get to talk to somebody cool about something cool. So, you know, it's pretty cool. You know, it's a lot of fun for me. So with that, I'm going to talk tonight a little bit about Stonewall Jackson, who, as far as I know, does not have a connection to Batavia. Closest I can come up with is he went on his honeymoon to Niagara Falls. When he got, so it's like close, not quite. He passed through Batavia on the way, but that's as close to Western New York as I can get you. He went there on his honeymoon, and once upon a time, my daughter, when she was 11, she was talking to her, when she was 6, she was talking to one of the Park Service historians at the place where Stonewall Jackson died. And this fellow's name was Keith Alexander. He's a former Marine Staff Sergeant. Didn't especially like kids, so when a kid would come in, he sort of had a routine that he would give. And he'd look at the kid and say, you know, you have something in common with Stonewall Jackson? And the answer was that you're in the building where he died, and you can hear the ticking of the same clock that Jackson heard while he was in that building. That's the answer. But when we walk in, because my daughter was a Stonewall Jackson fangirl. That's how I'm here tonight. It's because of my daughter. We walk in and he goes, you know, you have something in common with Stonewall Jackson? She says, yes. We both have blue eyes. So Keith gets his composure. You know, you have something else in common with Stonewall Jackson? Yes. We've both been to Niagara Falls. So he calls into the other room to the other historian. Frank! Stonewall Jackson ever been to Niagara Falls? Yes, he went there on the honeymoon. Who are you? And so that was my kind of introduction to the Park Service and Stonewall Jackson. I've been privileged to work at that building subsequently. Starting when my daughter was 11, we volunteered for Fredericksburg and Spotsylvania National Military Park. And so I've been privileged to work at that building for years. And this is a story that's very special to me. Not only because I think it's a very human story, but also because of the connection that my daughter and I have through Stonewall Jackson. And that's really kind of what opened up the Civil War for me. Because she fell in love with Stonewall Jackson. We started going to Civil War sites that had to do with Stonewall Jackson. And that's kind of what got me hooked. Most people think I got her hooked. She got me hooked. When Stonewall Jackson was a student at West Point, he kept a book of maxims. And every time he'd hear an aphorism or a quote or a little bit of wisdom, he would write it down. And that book is part of the collection at Tulane University. You can still see it today. And one of his favorite aphorisms that probably best exemplifies how he lived his life. You may be whatever you resolve to be. You may be whatever you resolve to be. And think about that word resolve and what it really means, what it truly means to commit, to resolve. And Jackson lived his whole life by this idea. When he was very young, his father died, his mother died a few years later. He was orphaned at a very early age, was raised by his dad's brothers. It was like being Cummins Jackson and his brothers. It was like being raised by Animal House. You know, just imagine kind of that frat boy environment. The Jacksons owned a racetrack, for heaven's sakes. Ooh, scandalous. But he grows up as such a fine young man in the community. He gets elected constable. Okay, and eventually will earn the opportunity to go off to West Point. He's woefully underprepared for that West Point education. But that sense of resolve drives him to improve as a student. And he goes from being near the bottom of his class after the first year to being near the top of his class after 4 years. Classmates said that if there had been a 5th year to the curriculum, he would have been the top student because that resolve drove him to improve. And then, like so many of his classmates, he goes off to war against Mexico, where that sense of resolve puts him in harm's way, doing his duty in such a way that he's lauded twice by the commander of the army himself, Winfield Scott, for battlefield bravery. After the war, he goes and serves in the pre-war army, doesn't like it a whole lot, has some problems with his immediate superior, a guy named William French. Many of us today know him as Blinky French. I blink when I say it. The more he drank, the more he blinked. Like I said, the more he drinks, the more he blinks, right? So they didn't get along, so out of the blue comes this invitation for him to join the faculty at the Virginia Military Institute. They need a war hero for their faculty. So he goes to VMI, where he's a terrible teacher. He's not prepared for that. He's supposed to teach natural history and philosophy. Today, what we would call physics. Jackson's no physicist. He's terrible. His students call him Tom Fool because he's so bad. But that sense of resolve drives him to improve and improve and improve and get better and better and better. So by the end of his 10-year career at VMI, students actually talk with a degree of respect about a man who'd once been called Tom Fool. Now that could be because the other subject that he teaches is artillery tactics. And he's a genius on the artillery field. You can't get a better instruction in artillery anywhere in the country, even at West Point, than you can at VMI from Major Tom Jackson. And then Civil War breaks out. And Jackson finds himself in July of 1861 on the plains of Manassas as the Union army's coming at him. The Confederate line is crumbling around him, and he's told to stand firm on a hilltop. And there stands Jackson like a stone wall. Let us resolve to die here, and we shall conquer. And the Confederate line reforms around him. The tide of battle turns, and the South wins the day. And Jackson earns one of the most famous nicknames in American history, Stonewall Jackson. That sense of resolve, putting him where he needs to be at the moment of crisis. That same sense of resolve sends him in the spring of 1862, north and south, up and down the Shenandoah Valley, fighting 3 different armies that outnumber his small force by more than 3 to 1, covering such vast distances over such short periods of time that people are so amazed they call them Jackson's foot cavalry, as they suddenly materialize, score a victory, disappear, showing up someplace else for yet another victory. And this happens at a time when Confederate fortunes elsewhere across the map are at their lowest. And so Jackson and these victories literally make him the most famous Confederate in the world, because the Confederacy is looking for some ray of hope. And Jackson in the Shenandoah Valley, driven by that sense of resolve, scores those victories. Then Jackson connects with Robert E. Lee outside of Virginia for what becomes the 7 Days Campaign. Kind of sleeps through most of that. But that sense of resolve drives him with Lee and his partnership, which has been called by some historians as the model partnership. And they score a series of victories that transforms the momentum of the entire Civil War, scoring victory after victory after victory. Until finally, in May of 1863, outnumbered more than 2-to-1, Robert E. Lee's army marches into the Virginia wilderness and takes on the large federal army that's concentrated at the small crossroads known as Chancellorsville. And there, finally, that sense of resolve that has driven Jackson from the humblest of origins puts him in harm's way. And that guiding principle of his whole life, perhaps, turns into his fatal flaw. To understand how he gets into that position, let's back up just a little to December of 1863. The Battle of Fredericksburg, where Ambrose Burnside leads the Union Army to its most lopsided loss of the war. And after that, his army is going to hunker down on the west bank of the Rappahannock River, the east bank of the Rappahannock River. Just spend the winter staring at Robert E. Lee's army, who's going to occupy the heights of Fredericksburg. Burnside will get replaced by a man named Joe Hooker, fighting Joe Hooker, in fact. A man who earned his nickname on the peninsula in the spring of 1862 because he's a tough, hard fighter. And a telegrapher, or excuse me, a correspondent who's watching the battles around Richmond runs back to file a report at the telegrapher's office. Fighting, dash, Joe Hooker. And as the telegrapher types out this headline, he leaves out the dash. So it says, fighting Joe Hooker. And Hooker hates that because it comes out as his nickname. But his men love it because it captures the fighting spirit that he has, that they have. It's a sense of elan. And they love that they fight for fighting Joe Hooker. He thought it made him sound too rash, too overconfident, too overzealous. But in fact, he's the man who says that we must have a dictator to run this war. And when Lincoln puts him in charge, he says, it's in spite of that, not because of it, that I'm putting you in charge of this army. You give us victories, then I'll worry about the dictatorship. And what Hooker does when he takes over this army is he's going to leave a decoy on the east bank going, look at me, look at me, look at me. John Sedgwick in command of half of the army, while Hooker takes the other half to the north, to the west. And because the army's so big, he's got to use 3 different river crossings to get across. And they're going to converge at this little crossroads of Chancellorsville, which sounds so quaint. Oh, Chancellorsville, like a little vacation destination, right? It's a little house in the middle of the woods. There's not even a hot tub at this little hotel, okay? There they're going to converge and then push forward and trap Lee against the river. The enemy must ingloriously fly or turn and give battle on ground of our own choosing, or certain destruction awaits him. May God have mercy on Robert E. Lee, for I shall have none. And what's amazing, and we forget about this generally, Hooker pulls off this maneuver successfully, marching a vast, 60,000 men through enemy territory, and converges here. But when he gets to the crossroad, he takes a time out. And his corps commanders are like, what are we taking a time out for? We got the drop on Robert E. Lee. Why aren't we going forward? But in fact, Hooker's obeying orders from President Lincoln. In early April, Lincoln had come to review the army that Hooker had rebuilt. And he inspected the troops, and he shakes hands and kisses babies and visits the wounded, and he meets with the officers. It's perhaps Lincoln's best effort at what today we would call retail politics. Just out there shaking hands, making it happen. And as part of that, Lincoln gets together with Hooker and he says, the next time you give battle, put in all of your men. Because if you think about what's gone on in the war up to this point, the Union armies had numerical superiority in every single engagement, but they've been attacking in piecemeal. If you think about the Battle of Antietam, for those of you who are familiar with it, we have the attacks on the north end of the field, then the attacks against the Sunken Road, then the attacks against Burnside Bridge. Why aren't they all attacking at once? Putting the pressure on the Confederates all at once. At Fredericksburg, we have the attacks at the south end of the field. Then we've got 1 wave, 2 wave, 3 wave, 4 wave, 5 wave, 6 wave, 7 waves at the north end of the field. Why not put in all of those men at once? So when Lincoln talks to Hooker, he says, when you give battle, put in all of your men. And he says it to him on 2 separate occasions. And then he talks to Hooker's second in command, Darius Couch. He says, next time you give battle, tell your boss, put in all your men at once, right? Okay. So when the army converges here at Chancellorsville, Hooker's obeying President Lincoln's orders. We've got to concentrate the army so that when we go forward, we can go forward with full force. Well, in the meantime, Robert E. Lee is in Fredericksburg and he's looking at the federal decoy, which is doing its job, occupying Lee's attention. But Lee's wondering, why aren't they doing anything? I mean, they're saying, look at me, look at me, look at me. And I'm looking, but they're not doing anything. And Lee finds this pretty curious. And then he starts getting reports of some sort of something happening back here. And as he's trying to read the tea leaves, he realizes that this must be the real threat, and this is just a decoy. So he's going to leave a decoy of his own under his bad old man, Jubal Early. Reportedly the only man in the army willing to swear in front of Robert E. Lee. And Early's going to stay here in Fredericksburg with 11,000 guys go, hey, we're looking at you, we're looking at you. Well, Lee turns the rest of his army west and marches out to meet the foe. So in the morning of May 1st, Hooker's feeling pretty good. His army is concentrated. His men are anxious to go. His corps commander's really itching for a fight. He tells them all, don't worry. The Army of Northern Virginia is the legitimate property of the Army of the Potomac. We got this. And he marches forward on 3 separate roads. One is a road that just goes straight to Fredericksburg. It's called the Plank Road, or the Orange Turnpike, depending on where you're at. Okay? And it just goes straight into Fredericksburg. To the south is the old Plank Road. Okay? I live off of that road. To the north, paralleling the Rapidan and Rappahannock rivers, is the creatively named River Road. And as Hooker advances forward, he feels like he's got the drop on Robert E. Lee, who has come out to meet him. At about 10 o'clock in the morning, Lee hits him right in the nose about 3 miles to the east of Chancellorsville. And Hooker backs up, and he tries to push forward, and there's back and forth along this main road here on the turnpike. Down on the old Plank Road, also hit. And they get back and forth, back and forth. But the Federals are pushing forward with their numerical superiority, trying to dislodge the Confederates. But then Hooker, inexplicably goes, pull back, pull back, pull back. He later apocryphally says that at that moment, Joe Hooker lost faith in Joe Hooker. And so he's going to order his army to pull back. And this doesn't go over so well with his army, because here in the middle, he's got the 2nd Corps pulling up his fresh reinforcements. He's got the U.S. regulars on the vanguard, the professional soldiers taking the field. Down here, he's got Henry Slocum and the 12th Corps. Slocum doesn't believe the order to pull back. The guy who brings it to him is a guy named Washington Roebling. You might know him as the man who constructs the Brooklyn Bridge. Now, we've all heard, okay, I got a bridge I can sell you. So coming from Washington Roebling, maybe there's a little credibility, right? Slocum says to him, you're a damned liar. I'm going to go back and get the word from Hooker directly. And if I find out you're lying, I'm going to have you hung. Feeling real good about that one. But Slocum comes back, and Hooker's like, yeah, he's right. I want you to pull back. Slocum almost disobeys orders because he's like, I got the drop. Like, I just need to get out there. Pull back, pull back, pull back. So Slocum will bring his 12th Corps back. That allows these Confederates to then turn in this direction. So as the forces on the turnpike are holding their own here, suddenly like, oh, wait, I got to do this too. So they're going to then get the order to pull back. On the northernmost road, on the river road, unopposed, is a calm, cool, temperamented guy by the name of George Gordon Meade. I don't know if any of you know George Gordon Meade. He's the picture of serenity. That's sarcasm. His men call him the goddamn Google-eyed snapping turtle. His chief of staff refers to him as Old Peppery. Okay? Meade blows his top. He's like, I have to pull back. If I can't hold the high ground, how am I expected to hold the low ground? I mean, he's apoplectic with anger. His face is as red as your shirt. And Hooker's like, no, we got this, we got this. Because from Hooker's point of view, by pulling back, creating a defensive position around this intersection, Hooker now is choosing the battlefield, ground of our own choosing, and he's protecting this intersection, which controls his lines of reinforcement, supply, communication, and, if necessary, retreat. He's in enemy territory. He knows Robert Lee's got to come at him. Supposedly, his cavalry is off-cutting Lee's supply line, so Lee's not going to be able to just stay where he's at. So from Hooker's perspective, he's holding all the cards, except for one. Anybody know what that is? And of course, Stonewall Jackson on the other side, going to be really important. What has Hooker just surrendered?
Initiative.
The initiative. Right? The initiative. Hooker has surrendered the initiative. And that's the one card Robert E. Lee's always looking to play. Right? This is a man whose name is audacity itself, right? A guy who's willing to take strong, bold, calculated risks. And now that Hooker has surrendered the initiative, Lee wants to figure out how he can pick up the initiative and take the fight to Hooker. So he's going to ride to the battlefield and meet with his top lieutenant, Stonewall Jackson, who's been the one overseeing all of this fighting. And I'll pull out this chair. We're going to pretend this is an old cracker box for a dramatic effect here. As the 12th Corps abandoned the field through here, it's left a bunch of supplies behind, including some abandoned ration boxes, and old cracker boxes. And Lee and Jackson pull them up. They spread a map out on the ground in front of them, the campfire flickering, putting odd shadows and light across that map, and they're studying the position, trying to figure out what to do. And as they're looking at the positions in the army, into camp comes riding Lee's flamboyant cavalry commander, Jeb Stuart. Woo-wee, boys! I got some news for you. I've been out scouting, and the Union right flank is just out there hanging, unprotected. And Jackson stabs the map and says, there's where we should attack. He doesn't know how he's going to get out there. He doesn't know what it's going to take, but that sense of resolve that guides him is going to get him where he needs to be on that battlefield. Now, to understand why the flank is so important, let me just ask the whole front row to stand up, if you don't mind, just for a second. You've all just been conscripted into the Army. Welcome to the service. Now, if I'm going to attack you, and I just come straight up the middle, how many of you can shoot at me? All of you, right? Okay, that's 6 to 1. Now, I'm a writer. Nobody said there'd be math involved, but I don't think those numbers add up very well, right? Okay? So that's why we don't want to have frontal assaults if we don't have to. But what if I come down here to the flank and I attack here? Now how many of you can shoot at me? One. Okay? But she's a badass, so it's still going to be a fight, right? Okay? But at the point of contact, it's 1-on-1. I still have to fight all 6 of them, but I can do it one at a time. So that's why the flank becomes so important. Let's give it up for our conscripts. So Jackson doesn't know how he's going to do it, But if this flank is unprotected, this is the spot to attack. Ideally, you want to anchor your flank like on a river so someone can't get up and around. Or put it on top of the hill so you can see what's coming at you. Or have your cavalry out here protecting it. Hooker doesn't have his cavalry. They're on a raid toward Richmond trying to cut Lee's supply line. Not going very well as a hint. So Jackson stabs at the map. Now he's got to figure out, how do I get there? So he's going to send Stuart off to do some reconnaissance to find a way to get to that flank. In the meantime, he's going to take a nap underneath a tree. His staff members see him kind of shivering under there. They're going to cover him up with a tarp. And eventually Stuart's going to come back, and he's going to bring with him a guy named Charles Welford. Welford owns a local iron furnace known as Catherine's Furnace, which on our map is kind of about where you're at. And Welford looks at that map and is like, yeah, I can get your guys out there because there's a road that doesn't show up on your map. And I know it's there because I cut it myself to bring wood to my iron furnace. In fact, I'll give you my son, Charles Jr., to act as your guide. So this is home field advantage coming out for Stonewall Jackson. So as Jackson and Lee talk this over, trying to figure out what exactly to do, Lee says, well, what do you propose to make this movement with? And Jackson says, my entire corps, 28,000 men, are going to get around over to that flank. And Lee's like, well, what's that going to leave me? And Jackson says, the divisions of Anderson and McLaws. Now, that means Lee's going to stay on this side of the battlefield with 14,000 men. And go, look at me, look at me. Well, Jackson takes 28,000 on this road that doesn't show up on any maps to get to the flank. Now, Lee's army is already divided. A quarter of his army under James Longstreet are in southeast Virginia, a place called Suffolk, on a foraging mission, sending back much needed supplies to this army. So Lee's army is already divided once. And then he's left 11,000 guys under his bad old man back here in Fredericksburg. So his army's divided a second time. And now, Jackson is suggesting to divide the army a third time in the face of a numerically superior foe. Well, we've got to think about that. And he says, okay. And Jackson says, I shall be on the road by dawn. It's about 8:15 before he finally gets going. But they confer one last time at that spot. It becomes an iconic moment. Nobody overhears their conversation, but it gets painted, written about, portrayed. It becomes one of the seminal moments of today, what we would call the lost cause. You have the great marble man, Robert E. Lee, the great war chief of the South, conferring with the man who was about to become the great martyr of the Confederacy. Last conversation, what could they be saying? They don't know what lies ahead. They don't know what fate has in store for them. This is the pinnacle of all the hopes of the Confederacy right here. At least in hindsight. It's a moment pregnant with mythology and story. Jackson leads his men onward, off into the woods, on this road that doesn't exist. Temperatures are going to get up into the mid-80s that day. These men are marching shoulder to shoulder, four across. So look at your formations. You guys are in formation right now, just a little wider than they would have been. Marching in this heat, under orders to be as quiet as possible, because this is a top secret mission. But this is Jackson's foot cavalry. These are the men who won worldwide acclaim for their marches. Okay? This is just a Tuesday afternoon, right? Jack, who knows where he's leading us, but it's going to lead end in victory. Okay? That's their attitude. And as Jackson rides up and down the column, the men see him and they take off their hats in silent salute, waving to old Jack as he rides by. Gives a little tug to the brim of his own kepi, keeps on going. Nobody notices that he's wearing every article of clothing he owns, including his India rubber raincoat, despite those temperatures in the mid-80s. Men are falling out of the ranks from heat stroke, Jackson himself stops on at least 2 occasions to throw up. Nobody notices that he's sick because his medical staff is tending to all these other guys that are suffering from heat stroke. And Jackson's resolve is driving him onward, onward, onward. He doesn't have time to be sick. He'll be sick later. We must accomplish this maneuver. And so he drives his men forward on this top secret mission. But the secret doesn't last long. As the army gets close to Catherine Furnace, there's a high spot right about here called Hazel Grove. And it's occupied by Dan Sickles, the federal officer who's a political appointee. And Sickles has guys that are up in the trees looking around, seeing what they can see on the battlefield. And through a little gap in the trees, they see a file of butternut going through. And they tell their boss, and Sickles is like, oh, let me at him, I want to go. And he tells his boss, Joe Hooker, that I've got Confederates in front of me, let me go at him. And Hooker comes to the conclusion that this is Robert E. Lee's army retreating from the battle. My big, strong, manly army is scared off Lee. And so what Hooker decides is that he's going to squash Lee's men right here, who are basically the rear guard, demonstrating to hold them in place while the rest of the forces get away. I'm going to squash them today, and tomorrow we're going after the rest of the column. He tells Sickles that he can go ahead and start bombarding the column with his artillery if you like. So they start shooting at Jackson's men, who hustle through a little gap in the trees. They can see the cannonballs coming from literally a mile away, so they hustle through. Nobody gets really hurt, but the jig is up. Secrecy's gone. Eventually, Sickles will get permission to advance with some of his infantry, and they'll push down toward Catherine Furnace. Jackson will peel off his lead regiment, the 35th Georgia. They'll stake a position just north of the Furnace, and they'll hold off Sickles' men long enough for Jackson's column to disappear off into the woods. The Georgians will eventually get driven back, overwhelmed, captured. Their commander, a guy named Emory Best, gives the orders to his men, retreat! And then he runs away, not making sure that his men actually heard their order, which they didn't. And that's why most of the regiment gets captured, even though they've done this great job holding off the army. Best will ultimately get court-martialed for cowardice for abandoning his men on the field. But Jackson's able to get away, marching past, off into the woods. And when he gets here to the Brock Road, he's able to turn northward. Nobody can see. And he marches through the woods. He's able to get onto the flank of the Union Army. But he's got so many men that at 3:15 he sends an order to Lee saying, I'm almost in position. God grant us success. I'll be in touch. But he can't wait for all of his men to get in line because he's worried about running out of daylight. So he's only going to attack with 2 of his 3 divisions. And he's going to line up Robert Rhodes in the front. He's going to line up Raleigh Colston right behind him. And then A.P. Hill, coming onto the field, will serve as his reserves. Now, to give you an idea of what 28,000 men looks like, if we're going to use the turnpike as the axis of our advance, center of our line to line up, Jackson's men stretch for a mile to the south of the road and a mile to the north of the road. 2 miles of men stacked, brigade by brigade deep. So we're talking a massive hammer to push forward against the Union Army. The troops that are here are the Union 11th Corps. About 60% of them are German immigrants. Their commander is a guy named Oliver Otis Howard, who has the unfortunate initials of O.O. Howard, which will become Uh-oh Howard after what's about to happen to him. And his men have heard this movement. They know something's going on. They're getting a little antsy. Some of them send word up the chain of command that something's going on out there. And some of those regimental commanders are told, don't worry about it. We're supposed to cook up 3 days worth of rations because tomorrow we're going after them. That's Lee's army retreat. Some of these guys are like, I don't think they're retreating. And some of those regimental commanders told by their brigade commander, Thomas Devon, if you keep harassing me, I'm going to have you arrested. Some of those regimental commanders take it under their own initiative to refuse the flank, meaning they're just going to take their line and bend it in a right angle to offer themselves some sort of protection, but it's not going to be enough. They don't know. They get 2 miles where the Confederates line up against them. So at about 5 o'clock, Robert Rhodes, who's going to lead this attack, comes up to Jackson. It's one of the great human moments of this whole pageant. We see a little bit of school spirit shine through with Jackson. Rhodes had been on the faculty at VMI. Raleigh Colston had taught math at VMI. A number of the staff officers are alums of VMI or former students of Jackson. By one account, there's some 20, 22 people right around Jackson's immediate orbit who have VMI connections. Jackson says, "The Institute shall be heard from today." When Rhodes comes to him, Jackson says, "Are you ready?" Rhodes says, "I am." Jackson says, "You may begin." 2 miles of Confederates begin sweeping through the Virginia wilderness. The Federals that are here, cooking up those rations, some of their bands are playing, guys are relaxed, unsuspecting that anything's coming until deer start bounding out of the woods. Fox, raccoons, grouse, "Hey, venison for dinner, boys, get your rifle." They don't realize something's driving that game through the woods until the next thing that bursts through the woods is the rebel yell. And suddenly these guys are caught completely off guard. Jackson smashes into them and rolls them up, according to one Union soldier, like a wet blanket. These guys just fall pell-mell to the rear in complete panic. Many of them try to mount a defense, trying to create some sort of blockage, but Jackson's line, so big, just wraps right around them and dislodges them and forces them back. Has anybody here been to the Chancellorsville battlefield before? Okay, a couple of you have. And I urge you to go walk that ground, because one of the misconceptions of Chancellorsville is that these men were just driven off and they ran like cowards. They'll earn the ignoble nickname, the Flying Dutchman, because of their German descent. But if you walk that ground, you'll see there's no good place to mount a defense. There's no good solid ridge line, no place to anchor your flanks. It's just a series of tumultuous little hills in some deep, thick woods. So anytime these men try to mount a defense, they're quickly overwhelmed. The best defense that lasts a half an hour under Adolphus Bushbeck and what becomes known as the Bushbeck Line, 154th New York, from down in my neighborhood around Bonaventure. They're part of that instrumental defense, but even they are driven off of the field. Falling pell-mell back through the Chancellorsville intersection where Joe Hooker is standing on the porch of the mansion watching these men flee by, go, "Who are those guys?" So panicked that they run through Hooker's line on the east side of the battlefield to get captured by Lee's guys on the far side of the battlefield. Hooker tries to get them rounded up, get some sort of order. He gets the bands to start playing patriotic airs to try to get things going, but he's not able to stop the rout. Meanwhile, Jackson's men keep pushing forward. And they get to an area right about here where Dan Sickles had been. But because of all that fighting down around Catherine Furnace, he has advanced down toward the furnace. So he's out of position. So then Jackson gets a whole chunk of real estate for free, and he's able to sweep forward. There's nothing the Federal Army can do to stop it. In fact, it's the wilderness itself that brings Jackson's attack finally to a halt. This is a 70 square mile deciduous jungle, a second growth forest. All those iron furnaces, they need fuel. So all the trees have been clear-cut to provide fuel for these furnaces since the mid-1700s. So what we have in this area now is second and third growth forest. So it's not tall, old trees like once upon a time. It's trees that are maybe 10, 12 feet tall, really thick brush, a lot of vines, holly bushes, rhododendron, poison ivy, and it's all full of snakes and ticks. And so as Jackson's men are trying to advance, Maybe you do okay, but you get tangled up in some brush, you're lost, and you run into some Federals, and then you run into them, and you get lost down a little hillock, and so, you know, and so like the wilderness is just stopping Jackson's advance. And so as they push forward, that 2-mile front continues to shrink and shrink and shrink. So he's finally about a mile to the west of the Chancellorsville intersection. His front's down to about 600 yards. They finally just run out of momentum. At this point, A.P. Hill comes onto the field. His 3rd Division. They're going to be the reinforcements to continue this attack. He needs to figure out what to do. So he's going to do a reconnaissance. He's going to confer with Jackson, who says, cut them off from the ford, Hill. Cut them off from the ford. So instead of just driving forward as we've been, the ford, which is the Federal Army's escape route, is that way. So Jackson's calling an audible. We're going to change objectives. We're going to try to cut the Federal Army off from its escape route. Let's go figure out how to do this. So Hill's going to ride out, do a reconnaissance, see what's going on. Jackson, who has deep trust issues and doesn't like A.P. Hill to begin with, is also going to go on a reconnaissance. Okay? So they're both looking at the Orange Turnpike as a place to go out, check things out. But Jackson's staff is like, you don't want to go out on that open road. Full moon is coming up. It's getting dark. People will see you out there. You'll be exposed. And as it happens, someone who's serving on Jackson's staff, a guy named David Kyle from the 9th Virginia Cavalry, who's acting as a messenger, he said, well, General Jackson, you don't have to go on that road. There's a road that doesn't show up on your map. What do you know? Home field advantage again. And the reason David Kyle knows it's there is because his sister lives about here on the battlefield, a place called the Bullock Farm. You see the site of the Bullock Farm on the battlefield today. This is literally David Kyle's backyard because he lives with his sister. I know there's a road that doesn't show up on the map. I'll take you there. And so David Kyle's going to lead Jackson's men on this parallel road in through the darkness. Now, this is where the fog of war is heavy on the battlefield. I'm going to conscript you guys again, but you don't have to get up this time. Let's say you guys are the skirmishers. All right? And then you are the main Federal line. Okay? Now, what's the job of your skirmishers? What's the job of a skirmisher?
First information.
First information, all right? You are the point of first contact. If there are rebels out here, you're the first people to knock into them. And then your job is to go back and tell the second row, we got rebels out there, okay? You are the advanced eyes and ears of the army. Okay? So if you're still out in front of the main line, you guys can assume the coast is clear because nobody's come back to tell you there's trouble, right? Okay. Well, as Jackson's men have advanced in this direction, down at Catherine Furnace, there's a cavalry outfit, the 8th Pennsylvania Cavalry, and they're going to ride back up to what they think is the main line. And as they come up in front of the main line, but behind the skirmishers. And they get themselves into about this area. Oops. Okay, and they turn and they see what a precarious position they're in, and they try to break through and they can't. They turn, they try to break through and they can't, and they scatter. And they leave behind a pile of dozens of dead horses and horsemen. So now you guys are like, what gives? You guys didn't alert us to what's going on. And then, from down in this area, a lost regiment of Pennsylvania infantry, 148th Pennsylvania, or 118th Pennsylvania, excuse me. I don't know what it is with Pennsylvanians lost in the wilderness. There are probably guys still out there today. Okay? And they're kind of groping through, and they come into the angle so they miss you and knock into you guys. There's a quick little, oh, who are you? We're looking for a vacation to Andersonville. You know, and off they go. But now you guys are nervous because there's infantry here that shouldn't have been here. And it's into this area, in front of the main line, but behind the skirmishers, that Jackson and his staff ride out on their reconnaissance. Hill and his staff on the turnpike go out on reconnaissance at the same time. Jackson gets out there, and he stops, and he listens, and he can hear the Federals are chopping down trees, and they're digging dirt. You can hear shovels and spades, and he knows that if he waits until morning, they will have fortified their position, and he will have to attack fortified works. So if he continues the attack now, even though it's dark, and a night attack can be confusing, at least he'll be attacking an unfortified position. So he comes to the conclusion that they're going to continue this attack. Hill, out of the turnpike, because he doesn't have a David Kyle, basically comes to the same conclusion. And so Hill and his staff are going to turn and head back to the line. Jackson and his staff are going to turn and head back into the line. That fog of war I mentioned, heavy on this battlefield. It's dark. Full moon is coming up, casting weird shadows through this thick foliage. All the gunpowder's hanging like a heavy mist in the woods. And on the southern end of the Federal line, the southern end of the Confederate line, someone hears some weird noise off in the bushes. What's up? And they fire. And you know, if that's you, then like, well, what's she? So you fire too, and then now you're nervous. What are they firing? There must be something out there. And the fire ripples from south to north, even as Hill and Jackson are returning to the line. And so they get caught in this rolling thunder. One of Jackson's staff officers, his brother-in-law, Joseph Morrison, gets shot from his horse. He leaps to his feet and says, "Stop! You're firing into your own men!" But the Confederate troops that are right there, the hardened, grizzled veterans of the 18th North Carolina, they've seen every trick in the book. And we've already had horsemen out here where there shouldn't be, right? We've already had Federals out here where there shouldn't be. Sure, we're firing into our own men, right? And their major, John Barry, says, "It's a lie! Pour it into them, boys!" And the whole Confederate line erupts in a concentrated volley. Hits Jackson 3 times. One bullet, nearly spent, ricocheting through the trees, hits Jackson in the palm of his hand and lodges just under the skin. Another, it's on his right hand, excuse me. The other, as he throws his arm up, goes in near his elbow, comes out near his wrist. The third hits him 3 inches below his left shoulder. His horse bolts off into the woods. His staff members really try to get it under control quickly. They ease Jackson down. He says he's hit. He fears that it's serious. And as they're talking, from the south, A.P. Hill pops out of the woods. His men had also been caught in that volley. And everyone in his party, exposed as they were, on the open turnpike. They're either killed, wounded, or they have their horse shot out from underneath them and they're captured. Everyone except for Hill dove into the ditch at the last moment. And he hears these voices and he goes to investigate and he sees that his boss is hurt. And it's going to be up to Hill to take over as senior division commander. But all this ruckus has attracted the attention of Federal artillerists back at the Chancellorsville mansion. So they start bombarding the forest with artillery shells. One of those shells comes in and explodes, and the shrapnel hits Hill across the back of both legs, making him unable to ride his horse. And so he's not going to be able to take command. And my good friend Chris White suggests that Hill maybe was like, "Oh, I can't do anything. I'm so hurt." Because Hill realizes he's inheriting a boondoggle. Right? He doesn't like Jackson. He's going to get blamed for anything that goes over. He doesn't want to take over. So command is going to devolve to the next senior guy in the field. That's Robert Rhodes. It's the first time Rhodes has ever commanded a division. He can't take over the Corps. So they're going to look for someone with more experience. And they're going to call to that next senior guy on this side of the field. It's going to be Jeb Stuart, the cavalry commander, who's going to arrive and see the situation for what it is. In hindsight, we look back at this and think this was a brilliant flanking maneuver by Jackson. His attack is just an overwhelming success. And up to this point, it is. But I always like to argue that it's Jackson's wounding at Chancellorsville at this moment is probably the best thing that could have happened to Robert E. Lee. Because from Stuart's perspective, as he sees it, we've got Jackson's guys over here on this side of the battlefield, Lee's guys over on this side of the battlefield, and in the middle is a big, angry, wounded Union army that could turn and squash Jackson or turn and squash Lee. Stuart is not interested in continuing this attack. He wants to reunite with Lee so that they can find some safety in numbers. They're going to be able to do that. They will connect at Hazel Grove overnight, and in the morning on May 3rd, they will put the squeeze on Hooker. It will be the second bloodiest day of the Civil War, where one man falls every single second for 5 hours. But by 10:30, the Union line collapses, falls back. Lee rides into the Chancellorsville intersection, the mansion in flames behind him, his men covered with gunpowder and blood and sweat, cheering wildly for their commander, who has just overcome odds of more than 2.5 to 1 to score what some historians have called his greatest victory. Despite those stunning losses, it's Lee's triumphant moment. And it's true, because after this moment, it's all downhill for the Confederate Army of Northern Virginia. Lee will never again score a battlefield victory after Chancellorsville. This is the high water mark of the Confederacy. And we tend to forget that. We tend to forget those stunning casualties because of the one casualty we have left back in the woods. Stonewall Jackson, who has to get evacuated from the field. As he's doing so, that artillery comes raining in around the forest. Guys get him onto a stretcher to get him up out of the brush. They put him shoulder height and try to carry him out. One of those artillery shells comes in and explodes and kills the guy carrying the front of the stretcher, who drops Jackson from shoulder height, catapulting him forward. He lands on his wounded left arm, severing the artery. And he begins to bleed profusely. By the time they get him to an ambulance and evacuate him to a field hospital, several miles to the rear, they realize that the arm has to be amputated. And Jackson tells his doctor to do what you think is best. And they'll take off his left arm. By the time that operation is finished, Jackson will have lost half of his blood. It's an incredible trauma for anyone to have to survive. But the operation goes well. The prognosis for Jackson is good. The next day, as all of this is happening on that awful, dreadful 3rd of May, Lee sets orders for Jackson to get sent to the rear, where he's going to get put on a train and sent to Richmond, far away from the battlefield, to convalesce. But Jackson's like, well, if they capture me, I'll be fine. I've always been kind to their captives. They'll be kind to me. And he's like, I'm not having any of that nonsense. We're getting you out of here. And so Jackson will get taken by ambulance 28 miles to the rear, to a place called Guinea Station, where the Confederate railhead is going to put him on a train, send him south, except the train tracks have been torn up. I've alluded a couple times to the Federal cavalry raid in Lee's rear. Well, the one thing they managed to do is tear up the train tracks. And so Jackson can't be evacuated to Richmond. The guy in charge of that is a fellow by the name of George Stoneman. He comes from Lakewood, down by Chautauqua. He's buried down there. One of those little bits of Civil War irony, George Stoneman and Thomas Jonathan Jackson had been roommates at West Point all those years. So because Jackson can't get evacuated, they're going to take him into an office building of a plantation that's adjacent to the railhead. They're not going to take him into the main house because it's already being used as a field hospital. There's signs of a weird little infection going on. They're going to take over the office building so Jackson can have peace and quiet on his own. His spirits are good. Prognosis looks great. The doctor writes good reports. The arm is scabbing like it's supposed to be. And over the next couple days, the 5th and 6th of May, rain will patter on the roof. Jackson will talk to his staff. They pray frequently. Jackson's a very spiritual man, deeply religious. Many of his staff members are divinity students, so they're talking about the Bible and God's plan. And Jackson believes that God's got a plan for him. You know, he's anxious to find out what happens next. This must be God's will. Can't wait to see what's going to happen next. Meanwhile, they're waiting for those train tracks to come by. But on the night of May 6th, as it turns to May 7th, Jackson's condition takes an abrupt turn for the worse. His doctor, Hunter Holmes McGuire, who's been holding near constant vigil up to this point, finally goes to bed for the first time in days. And he leaves Jackson's chaplain, Reverend Beverly Tucker Lacey, in charge of Jackson. The other person that's there is Jim's camp servant, Jim Lewis, who's a slave from Lexington that Jackson has hired to be his cook and tend to the horses and things. And Jackson's complaining about pain in his chest. He asked Jim to get some wet compresses to put on his chest. Jackson believed in what was called hydrotherapy, the healing properties of water. McGuire thought it was quackery, but he's like, it doesn't do any harm. So if it gives comfort to Jackson, even psychologically, that's fine. So Lewis and Lacey, put these wet compresses on Jackson's chest. And as we'll find out, Jackson has severe pneumonia. And a lot of people today are like, oh, they put those wet compresses on his chest, it gave him pneumonia. That's not how pneumonia works, okay? When McGuire comes in, he's mortified to see this and see Jackson's condition, just pale and clammy. He starts yelling at Lewis and Lacey, like, why didn't you come and get me? Jackson's like, I told him not to. I'll be okay. But Lacey is aghast because Jackson's condition looks so bad. So he telegraphs down to Richmond, when the train is fixed, send up some extra doctors. We need some specialists on pneumonia, I think. And as it happens, the train gets repaired that day. And so up come these doctors from Richmond. Also on the train is Virginia Governor John Letcher, who's from Lexington, where Jackson had lived. They were hometown friends. And also on the train is Jackson's wife, Julia. Or excuse me, Marianne, and their daughter, Julia. And this is a much different situation for Julia, who had come to that very train station just 10 days earlier to see her husband for the first time in months. I mentioned earlier how Jackson had been orphaned at an early age. He had a half-brother from his mom's second marriage who he didn't keep in contact with. He had a sister who was a unionist, and he was estranged from her, orphaned at a very young age. And the one thing that he wanted his whole life was to be a father, to be a dad. And when he first moved to Lexington, he got married to Eleanor Junkin, who died in childbirth. And their son was stillborn. Jackson was so grief-stricken that he would go to the cemetery and throw himself prostrate on her grave, just weeping openly at the loss of his wife and child. And it took him months and months and months to recover. And when he finally did, he goes and he gets remarried to Marianne. And they try to have children, and their first daughter, Mary Graham, died after just a few weeks of jaundice. And Jackson, being the deeply religious man that he was, came to believe that this was all God's will. And he believed, he was a Presbyterian, but he was really like an old-fashioned fire and brimstone Calvinist. He believed in an angry, jealous God. And he came to believe that God had taken his first wife and child and had taken his second child because Jackson loved him too much, and God got jealous and took his family. And I think about, the one thing he wants in the whole world is to be a dad. So when Marianna writes to him in November of 1862 to share news of the birth of their daughter Julia, Jackson won't tell anybody because he's afraid if he does, it'll show too much excitement and God will take that child too. And if you read his correspondence through the winter of 62, 63 to Mariana, he'll say things like, remember that we have her but as a gift from God, who could take her from us if he so choose. You know, like you see this tension where he's like, we can't love her too much, but oh my God, I want to love her so much. And in April, she and the baby came to the Army, to this very same train depot on a rainy day, and Jackson went down to meet him. And the locomotive pulls up and he's standing on the deck with an umbrella, and he gets on the train to see his daughter for the first time, 5.5 months old. He finally gets to be a dad. The one thing he's wanted his whole life. And Mariana offers to let him hold the baby, and he won't because he's afraid he'll break her. And so they get off the train, and he's holding the umbrella over his wife and child, just staring at the baby as they walk to the carriage. And all these soldiers that are around the train depot just cheering wildly for old Jack and his family. And for 10 days, Stonewall Jackson gets to be a dad. And they're the happiest days of his life. And then Joe Hooker has to move and get the Army going and spoil things, so Jackson bustles his family on the train, sends them to Richmond, where they wait for word on what's happening. And she gets word quickly that something has happened to her husband. And so she's anxiously waiting for that train to be repaired. And she's on that first train as it comes in. And when she gets off the train, the first thing she sees are bodies being dug up from temporary graves. And at first she thinks it's them burying her husband. And she finds out it's actually Frank Paxton, leader of the Stonewall Brigade, killed on the 3rd day of the battle. Friend from Lexington. They knew the Paxtons well. That really shakes her up. And then she's not allowed to go in and see her husband because all the doctors have converged. So they send her into the main house of the Chandler plantation to keep her busy. Well, why don't you make some lemonade? You know, and that's when Jackson finally finds out that she's there, because she sends in a glass of lemonade, and after the examination, he takes a drink, makes it a face, and says, oh, that's too sweet, that's too sweet. The only one who makes it that sweet is my Esposito. She walks in and she sees him in the bed. The last time she'd seen him just days earlier, he said the peak of his manly vigor, and now he's but a shadow of himself in that bed. And she wears the expression on her face. She can't hide the shock. And he says, dear, we must not wear a long face in the sick. This is God's will. I will recover. We'll be fine. And she will sit with him for the next few days, not leaving his side except to go into the main house to breastfeed. But Jackson's condition will continue to deteriorate over the next couple days. Eventually she asks, at one point she offers to sing the Psalms with him, favorite pastime of his, and he says no. And he catches himself, says, no, we must always give glory to God if we have the opportunity. And one of his favorite Psalms, which is open on that page of the Bible in the room where he spent those days, you can still go there today and see a Bible open those pages. It says, "O Lord, please forgive, and let a repentant rebel live. Are not thy mercies wide and free? May not a sinner trust in thee?" The talk turns to what should happen to him if he dies, where he should be buried. Mariana doesn't want to have those conversations. Jackson still thinks he's going to rally. But on the morning of Sunday, May 10th, the doctors tell Mariana her husband will not survive the death. The man who breaks the news to her is their family physician, her cousin, Samuel Morrison, who's serving with the 2nd Corps. And he says, would you like me to tell him? And she says, no, I'll tell him. She goes in and she sits down next to Jackson's side and she says, if it be God's will for you to join him today, are you ready to be with him in his glory? And at first it's though he doesn't understand her or he doesn't hear her and thinks about it for a second, and finally he closes his eyes and he nods his head and he says, actually an infinite gainer to be so translated. She says, the doctor tells me that today will be the day. Jackson says, good, that's good. I've always desired to die on a Sunday. Being a man of deep religious faith, he thought that to die on the Sabbath would be a gift from God. And throughout the day, his condition continues to deteriorate. Doctors offer him some medication, which he declines. They do bring in the baby, Julia, finally. He's not wanted her to come in because he didn't want the baby to see him in this condition. But now that he knows his time is near, he allows Mariana to bring the baby in. And with his bandaged hand, he puts it on the baby's head and he prays over it and he calls her, my little comforter. Little comforter. Oh, wow. He begins fading in and out of delirium, in and out of consciousness. Starts shouting out battle orders. Send an AP here! Get Major Hawks! Get Major Hawks! Just stops and seconds. His whole body relaxes. Quiet moments pass. Dr. McGuire describes a smile of ineffable sweetness that comes over his face. Very calmly, very quietly, he says, let us cross over the river and rest under the shade of the trees. And then he dies. 3:15 p.m. on Sunday, May 10th, 1863. That sense of resolve that Jackson brought to his army is something Lee will never be able to replace. As I said, he never again scores an offensive battlefield victory, even though the war goes on for 2 more years. We won't see that kind of resolve until Ulysses S. Grant comes into that same wilderness 1 year and 3 days later, the start of what becomes the Overland Campaign. And Grant will continue to hammer and hammer and hammer and hammer for 11 straight months. What begins in the wilderness leads inexorably to the parlor of Wilmer McLean, the 9th of April, 1865. The anniversary is just coming up in a few weeks. The casualty lists are high. The names in the newspaper plummet Northern morale. But Grant knows if he lets the war drag on, the cost will be even higher. It's his sense of resolve that sees the fight through despite those casualties, knowing that he's going to save lives in the long run, even though the butcher's bill now is terrible. That's the kind of resolve that Jackson once had with Lee. It's the kind of resolve that Grant is going to have to win the war. That sense of resolve that drove Jackson from the humblest of origins to literally the peaks of fame, that then put him in a position no lieutenant general should have been in. Send a lieutenant out to get that information. That guiding principle of Jackson's life, which may have turned into his fatal flaw. And I ask you to consider that because, after all, you too may be whatever you resolve.